It's usually the same song and dance. Washington inspires confidence that this is the year things are different with a couple quick playoff victories. But history suggests it's nothing more than a delusion, another round of sick and inhumane punishment for long-starving DC hockey fans. This year, the Caps are adding a new wrinkle of sadism. Optimism abounded after defeating those rotten Penguins, expelling 20 years of torment in a single Yevgeny Kuznetsov goal, to reach the Eastern Conference Finals for the first time since 1998. Going into Tampa and thumping the Lightning in Games 1 and 2 might have been enough to sway even the most jaded Capitals fans. And yet the Caps still found a way to squander all that goodwill. Golden Standard: how Vegas became the most successful expansion team in sports history. Maybe, even down 3-2, things still can be different this year. It's just... well, let's check our notes. No team in the history of the NHL, and really, all professional sports, has proven so proficient at blowing leads in the playoffs as the Capitals. In games after taking a two-game series lead, either 2-0 or 3-1, the Caps are 13-43 all-time. That's a .232 win percentage. It's uncanny and defies all empirical sense. Teams that have taken a 2-0 series lead in the conference finals, semifinals since 1974-75 have gone on to win the series 39 of 41 times. If the Capitals fall to the Lightning in either of their two remaining games, it would mark the 11th time in franchise history they found a way to lose a playoff series in which they held a two-game lead. In light of what seems like an inevitability, let's look back on each of those playoff collapses of your 1985 first round versus Islanders. The build-up: the Capitals made the playoffs for a third time after finishing second in the Patrick Division with 101 points, tying what was then a franchise record. Their top five scorers, Mike Gartner, Bob Carpenter, Dave Christian, Larry Murphy and Scott Stevens, all were 25 or younger. The lead: Washington won the first two games in overtime, including a Game 2 double OT clincher by Gartner. They played best of five back then and needed just one more win to close things out, and so it began. The collapse: bet you can't guess who became the first team in NHL history to blow a 2-0 lead in a best-of-5 series. More Capitals fighting own playoff ghosts on top of Lightning. 1987 first round versus Islanders. The build-up: the Capitals saw a 21-point drop from their 1986 finish, but the familiar names were still around. Larry Murphy, a defenseman, led the team in scoring. The lead: the Caps and Isles split the series' first two games, but Washington built a 3-1 lead on the strength of back-to-back wins at Nassau Coliseum in Games 3 and 4. The collapse: New York stormed back with a 4-2 victory in Game 5 and won 5-4 at home in Game 6 to force a seventh game in Washington, one of the most famous in NHL history. They started playing April 18 and went on and won until Pat LaFontaine's goal in quadruple overtime clinched the series at 1:58 a.m. Eastern Time Easter morning. The Easter Epic, as it came to be known, lasted 6 hours, 18 minutes. 1992 first round versus Penguins. The build-up: the Penguins were the defending Stanley Cup champions, having defeated the Capitals and everyone else along the way in 1991. Sound familiar? The Caps were led by the trio of Michal Pivanka, Dale Hunter and Dino Ciccarelli, with a fresh-faced sophomore in Peter Bondra. The lead: the Capitals opened the series with a pair of home wins and practically had it in the bag after embarrassing the Pens on home ice with a 7-2 blowout in Game 4. The collapse: Penguins coach Scotty Bowman famously switched to a trap for Game 5 in a last-ditch effort to slow things down. It did the trick. Pittsburgh reeled off 3 straight wins, including on the road in Game 7. The series is probably best remembered for Mario Lemieux's 5-point Game 6 at the Igloo. More, 10 most memorable playoff moments in Capitals vs. Penguins rivalry. 1995 first round vs. Penguins. The build-up: the Capitals had just beaten the Penguins in 1994. And this season, Pittsburgh was without Lemieux, who'd taken a leave of absence for the year to recover from treatments for Hodgkin's lymphoma. Washington, a heavy underdog despite it all, had to like its chances, especially after the lead. Pittsburgh laid an egg with a pair of 6-2 losses in Washington after the teams split the opening 2 games. A 3-1 lead for the Capitals. What could go wrong? The collapse. Luc Robitaille's Game 5 overtime winner served as the seminal moment of his brief stop in Pittsburgh. The Pens went on to blowouts in Games 6 and 7, outscoring the Capitals 10-1 to close out the series. 1996 first round vs. Penguins. The build-up: these guys again? The Capitals and Penguin met in the playoffs for a 3rd year in a row. Everything was the same, pretty much, except Lemieux had returned. The lead: the Capitals went up 2-0 with back-to-back wins in Pittsburgh, but the Penguins took Game 3 to set up one of the most memorable goals in their history a game later. The collapse. In Game 4, Lemieux was ejected for instigating a fight with the Caps up 2-1 in the second period. Ken Reggett stuffed Joe Juneau on an overtime penalty shot, and Petr Nedved finally ended the marathon in a 4th overtime. Pittsburgh won Games 5 and 6 handily to close out the series. 2003 first round vs. Lightning. The build-up: no longer tormented by the rival Penguins. For now, this Capitals team was an odd collection of mostly older players and Jaromir Jagr, who had been traded to Washington a year earlier. The lead: the Capitals stole the first 2 games in Tampa, outscoring the Lightning 9-3. Stop us if you've heard this before. The collapse. A Game 3 loss in overtime, winner scored by Vincent Lecavalier, precipitated 3 consecutive losses for the Capitals, who scored just 3 goals in the final 3 games. People probably found ways to blame Alex Ovechkin for this one, even though he was merely 16 years old and still in Moscow at the time. 2009 second round vs. Penguins. The build-up: yes, the first playoff meeting between Ovechkin and Sidney Crosby. Neither had won a Stanley Cup in his young career. One still hasn't. The lead: this should have been a classic series. The Caps, feeling good coming off a first-round comeback against the Rangers. They trailed 2-0 and 3-1, took care of business at home in Games 1 and 2. Great. Clearly, they should have learned from their 1990s predecessors by now. The collapse. After dropping Games 3-5, the Capitals actually went to Pittsburgh for Game 6 and won in overtime. Thanks, David Steckel. Game 7, here we come. Marc-Andre Fleury stoned Alex Ovechkin on a breakaway 3 minutes in, leaving Caps fans to wonder what might have been. Instead, Crosby scored the game's first goal and the Penguins went on to win 6-2. More, top 15 NHL stars without a Stanley Cup. 2010 first round vs. Canadiens. The build-up: the Capitals were the NHL's best team, an offensive juggernaut, having captured the President's Trophy for the first time in franchise history, with a 121-point regular season. The Canadiens, meanwhile, were a no. 8 seed for a reason. Or so everyone thought. The lead: Washington quickly soothed the panic from a Game 1 overtime loss by winning 3 straight, outscoring the hapless Habs 17-9. The collapse: Yaroslav Halak took over for Carey Price in Game 5 and single-handedly changed the course of the series. He held the Caps to 1 goal in each of the next 3 games, stopping an absurd 136 of their next 139 shots. A 2-1 loss in Game 7 marked the beginning of the Capitals' identity crisis. 2013 first round vs. Rangers. The build-up. Adam Oates' first season behind the bench was a weird one of the Capitals, but they made the most of the lockout-shortened schedule and won their division. The lead. The Capitals won Game 1 and got it out a 1-0 victory in overtime in Game 2, with Mike Green mercifully scoring the game's only goal. The collapse. Identical 4-3 losses at Madison Square Garden evened the series. Another overtime hero, Mike Ribeiro, emerged and put the Caps in the driver's seat, needing just one more lousy win. Except, no one told Henrik Lundqvist, who posted back-to-back shutouts of 27 and 35 saves to complete the comeback. More lazy Alex Ovechkin narratives can be laid to rest. Finally, 2015 second round vs. Rangers. The build-up. Oates is gone. Enter Barry Trotz, whose steady, steely reputation from Nashville surely meant he knew how to hold a series lead. The Capitals didn't win the President's Trophy. That burden was the Rangers to bear. That's definitely how this thing works. The lead. After splitting the first 2 games in New York, the Capitals returned to D.C. and hung on for a pair of 1-goal wins. In Game 5, 2 minutes stood between the Caps, a 1-0 win in their first trip to the conference finals since 1998. It's here. They've finally done it. The collapse. Then Chris Kreider tied the game with 1:49 remaining in regulation and Lundqvist on the bench. You've got to be kidding. At this point, every Capitals fan on earth understood what was about to happen. Ryan McDonagh scored the overtime series clincher 9 minutes later.